With Liquor Barn, you can shop your favorite bourbon, that perfect bottle of wine, or discover something new. To place an order for pickup or delivery, download the Liquor Barn app, visit liquorbarn.com, or call your nearest Liquor Barn location. Follow us on social media and subscribe to our email list for all the latest news on products, promotions, and events. Liquor Barn, where Kentuckians go to celebrate life. Cheers!
Welcome to the Bourbon Life Podcast, your source for all things bourbon. Join your hosts, Mark and Matt, as they drink and review bourbons, share news about upcoming events, interview the who's who in the bourbon world, and, most importantly, bring you along for the fun of living the bourbon life. Now, here's your hosts, Mark and Matt.
All right, everybody, welcome back for another episode of the Bourbon Life Podcast. I'm your host, Mark, and with me, as always, is my good friend, Matt. Matt, how you doing tonight?
Oh, Mark, I'm doing great, man. How are you?
I'm doing good. I could see you on the camera looking around when I was talking. I'm like, is he? I guess you can probably hear me out there. I'm got the microphone radio voice going really loud. Sorry about that.
Yeah, quit yelling, man.
I'm just so excited about tonight's show. I can't help myself. You know what I'm saying?
Excited. What do I do with my hands?
I know. What do I do with my hands? So you doing all right?
Yeah, man, I am doing all right. Looks like here in central Kentucky, we've got the first little glimpses of spring. We all know how I feel about springtime.
Yeah, man. God, today was such a beautiful day. You know, I was working, unfortunately, that regular full-time job, sitting in my office down here at the house working, and I could see the beauty outside. So about 3:00, I just said, took my laptop, went out on the back porch and just enjoyed the sunshine and 60+ degree weather, man. So it's been nice. And this is the final week of daylight savings, or well, whatever. We go to daylight savings, I guess, on Sunday. My wife's been doing a countdown on Facebook for the last 18 weeks. Each Sunday she'll post how many more weeks we have. So she's got like this little cult following of Facebook people now that follow her countdown for daylight savings time. But man, I'm excited. By the time this will come out Friday, 2 days after, man, we're gonna spring forward and we're there. So that's gonna be great. All right, we should probably get into the show, and nobody wants to hear about daylight savings time, right? So you want to tell everybody who we have with us tonight?
Let's get right into it. Joining us is the master distiller from Four Roses, Brent Elliott. Brent, welcome to the Bourbon Life Podcast. How are you this evening?
Doing great, guys. How are you all doing?
Man, I'm doing great. And now Matt's the one that's over there screaming.
Yeah, I know. I got a little excited here.
Damn, man, he's fired up tonight, Brent. He's ready to roll. Well, Brent, we really appreciate you joining us tonight. I've been looking forward to this. We've had this on the calendar for quite a while, so I've been really excited to get to this one. I think you and I we've met briefly a couple of times in the past, just at little events. Matt and I actually are both Mellow Moments members, and I was fortunate enough to get selected to go to the Christmas party in 2019. So yeah. That was a lot of fun. Poor Matt didn't get selected though, unfortunately, man. Maybe next time though. But we love being in that club. It's a great group of people. But what we usually do, Brent, before we get into a big conversation, we usually like to tell everybody what we're going to be drinking on our first round. So if you don't care, I mean, this is your product, and we'll kind of let you just kind of tell everybody what we've got poured up for this first session.
Okay, we're going to start with our small batch.
Okay.
And I guess I should probably go ahead and tell you a little bit about how we do things, because it's going to apply to all three of the products we taste tonight.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it all comes down to the recipes that we use. We have 10 different recipes that we produce, and each one of these recipes is milled, mashed, fermented, distilled, and aged independently of each other. And then at the end of maturation, at that peak for whichever product it's designated for, then we pull the barrels, the different recipes, and mingle them together. And we do that for two reasons. One is for consistency, and the other is to create different flavors of variety, throughout our product range. And this small batch, this uses 4 of our recipes. Okay. And the recipes that we use here, we have 2 mash bills. I should start there too. We have a high rye mash bill, which is 35% rye, 6% corn, 5% malted barley, and then the 75% corn, 20% rye, 5% malted barley mash bill. then we have 5 yeast strains that we use to ferment any one of those recipes. We have an O, which is very rich and fruity, and that one is actually in the small batch. And we have a K, which is spicy. That's also in the small batch. Then we have a V, which is a more delicate fruit, an F, which is kind of herbal, kind of minty, and then a Q, which creates floral, sometimes candied type flavors and aromas. So with what we're tasting here, this is a combination of 6 and 7-year-old barrels. It's 90 proof. And again, it's those 4 recipes. It's both mash bills split evenly down the middle. And then it's the O yeast strain, which is the rich and fruity strain, and the K strain. So it's a nice balance between the fruit and the spice.
Yeah.
And this is really, before this one, we pretty much just used the 10 recipes for consistency. Because with a product like bourbon, it's, the regulations, you can't really do much to it.
Right.
You're kind of at the mercy of a lot of different variables, the weather, the grains, fermentation, which, we can control all these things to, with a lot of accuracy and a lot of precision. But when you're dealing with natural products, even the barrels, from one location to the next, you get different attributes. So that's how we would control that consistency, was by having that palette of different flavors that we could combine in different ratios to hit that target. But the small batch, that was really the first time, at least in the U.S. market, that we were able to go back to those 10 recipes and create something totally different and totally unique. And that's really, I think, what we achieved here with this one.
Yeah. How long has this one, the small batch itself, how long has this been a one of your standard in the lineup products?
It started out, it was pretty soon after we came back to the U.S. We came back as a straight bourbon whiskey in 2002. And in 2006, we were still just only selling Four Roses in Kentucky. And that's when we added this to the lineup. Now, we had single barrel and we had the Four Roses bourbon. And so we really didn't we were kind of getting ahead of ourselves. We were excited about what we had to offer.
Right.
We were only selling a few thousand cases, but we decided it was time to showcase what we could do. So we released this in 2006.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. That's great. Matt, I see you over there. You've been sniffing on it. What are you picking up over there on it?
So Brent, is this a pretty even split of 25% each recipe when you go through the blending process, or is it differ a little bit?
It does differ. It's heavier on the K, the spicy yeast, than the O. But that being said, to me, the O, a few of our yeast strains are a little more aggressive. Mm-hmm. They shine through a little bit more than the other ones. They're not as subtle. And the O is one of those. I think it takes a little bit of O to go a long way, just because of that rich, fruity character. And this is about 30%. So it's 15% and 15% of the OESO and the OBSO. But to me, even at 30%, that fruitiness is really what defines this. And the spice is there, and it helps to balance and give that those layers of complexity. But it's really that rich fruitiness that defines the flavors on this one for me.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And Mark will roll right into it. I get a good nose of nice juicy berries, like a good raspberry, kind of a tangy fruit on it. It's got a sweet nose too. There's some honey in it for me. And I'm also getting a nice little bit of touch from the oak on it, from the age.
Yeah, you kind of cut out there for a second, Matt, at least on my end. Sorry about that. If nobody, I heard a little bit of that, but sorry, I'm not sure, Brent, if you heard him or not, or if he cut out or.
Yeah, just for a second there, a little glitch. But you're back.
It's a glitch in the matrix, man. And what are
just right as you took a sip, you started describing the flavors and just overloaded the system there.
Well, all right. Well, good honey, good juicy berries, like a nice tart raspberry, nice juicy fruit, and a little bit of the oak coming through with the age on it as well. And it's got a really inviting nose.
Yeah, it definitely does. I really like that. I mean, I know this is right in Matt's wheelhouse. Matt's a rye guy, and I know he's a huge Four Roses fan as well. But he loves, and it's funny when you say a lower rye mash bill, but you're still talking about 20% rye.
Yeah, it's all relative, I guess.
Yeah, I mean that's compared to a lot of bourbons out there, that's still in itself, and that's considered a high rye mash bill. So 35. I mean, you're 16 short of being a rye whiskey there on the high rye. But I know Matt really enjoys that. I do too. I mean, this is a solid bourbon. I do some tastings online, with people. And when we're introducing people to bourbon, they're not really bourbon drinkers. This is one of the ones that I always will suggest that we start with just to try, because it's a great introductory bourbon for a lot of people. It's a nice, it's a 90 proof bourbon. It's not going to burn anybody up, and it's just got a lot of nice characteristics, and it's well balanced in my opinion. So yeah, I think I really, really like this one a lot.
Yeah, I think it's approachable, it's rounded, it's complex, it's got just about everything. So it's good for seasoned bourbon drinkers and people just
Right.
coming into the category. I think it's just so approachable, easy
Yeah.
to drink.
Yeah, I agree with that too. And I guess when I said that, I didn't mean, just for somebody getting into
Oh, no.
bourbon drinking. It's something that's really enjoyable for someone like myself that's, been drinking bourbon for maybe a year or two. So, but I enjoy it. So Brent, now that we kind of talked a little bit about the first round of what we're drinking, let's talk a little bit about you. I mean, can you kind of give everybody a little bit of a background of who you are and how you got started in the industry and what you do as master distiller?
Yeah, well, I grew up in Kentucky, the western side of the state in Owensboro. I went to school in Lexington, the University of Kentucky. Studied
Go Cats.
chemistry. Go Cats. Studied chemistry. I drank bourbon in college, and yet I never even really imagined being in the industry. I just it's never occurred to me. It's one of those things that
Yeah.
almost maybe it'd be too good to be true. Yeah, it hadn't occurred to me. And so, I graduated. I had a few jobs that weren't nearly as interesting as making bourbon. But I was actually living in Tennessee. I thought my life was just beginning. I just bought my first house. I'd just gotten married. And we came up and ended up taking a tour of Woodford Reserve just on a weekend trip. And that was on a Saturday. And that's, I guess, when it occurred to me that there's got to be, it's all science on, if you break it down to far enough level, it's chemistry. There's biology, There's chemistry, there are a lot of mechanics involved in the process, but it all comes down to chemistry. And so I thought, this is it's worth a shot. I'm going to go home, just see what's out there. And that was on a Saturday. On Sunday, I found a posting online, and it didn't say what distillery it was. It just said assistant manager with Kentucky distillery, chemistry background. I can't remember exactly what the requirements were, but I thought, this is perfect. And I applied. I heard back from the recruiter pretty much immediately. She didn't give me a lot of information. All she told me was that it was a Kentucky distillery. It was in Lawrenceburg, and told me a little bit about the role. And so after that first conversation, I Googled bourbon in Lawrenceburg, and it came up Wild Turkey, of course. And I knew Wild Turkey, so I was super excited about that. So next time I talked to her, I guess I was trying to impress her. I'd let her know that I had done my homework. I was like, we can cut the charade. I know who we're talking about here. Wild Turkey. And so I actually know it's a distillery. It's Four Roses. You may not have heard of them. They've just recently come back to the United States. And I actually had not heard of them, but I had driven by the warehouses just like a year or two before that.
Yeah.
I was, outside of Bardstown. And so that was my only experience. And I remember thinking, as I drove past those warehouses, I saw, warehouses as far as the eye could see, big Four Roses sign. And, having grown up in Kentucky, having, enjoying bourbon at the time and having enjoyed it for several years, I was kind of confused that many barrels right there, in the heart of bourbon country with a Four Roses name,
right,
could have escaped me. It was really kind of confusing. And I think I remember thinking they'd probably export it all to China or something. There's got to be a catch. There has to be a clear explanation for why I haven't seen this on the shelf ever. And turns out, I guess I wasn't far off the mark, because it was export only,
right,
up until just right before that. And so shortly after that interview, I came up, and I was still excited about it. I was like, oh well, okay, Four Roses, whatever. Let's go up there and see what they have to say. And so I came up and immediately fell in love. Well, actually, I still hadn't tried the product. So I had the recruiter ask the distillery where I could get a bottle. Because I wanted to try it first, only makes sense. I want to make sure that what I was getting into was something that I could actually get behind. Because that was kind of the whole idea, to get into something, into an industry that was more than just, making glue, which is one of the things I'd done previously. I didn't want to get into making glue. I wanted to get into something that I could be passionate about, and something that I really believed in. So, and at the time, she's like, well, you can't get it in Tennessee. I'm like, okay, well, where can I get it? And there was a place in Bowling Green, Kentucky, on my way up, Chuck's Liquor Store, Chuck's Liquors. And so I stopped and I bought a bottle of Single Barrel on my way up the day before the interview. And yeah, so my first taste of Four Roses was Single Barrel the night before the interview in a hotel room in Frankfort, Kentucky, where I live now. And I fell in love with it. So I started to get more excited, and I absolutely fell in love with it. I mean, I was pretty well versed in bourbon. I'd tried a couple of the higher end bourbons, but I was more of just and you didn't have a lot of options in 2005. You didn't have the selections you have now. But I had a few that were staples, and this was sort of a notch above. It was higher proof, a little more age, more complex. So I was excited. Then I showed up. I interviewed. Loved the facility. Loved the attitude of everyone. All the people were fantastic, and everyone I talked to, the whole thing was, I was making a big move there. I was going to be leaving, a job that I'd had for 5 years. My wife was employed. We just bought a house. Like I said, we were starting our family. We were ready to get going. And so I actually went into it. I was like, I need you guys to sell me on this. I need to be convinced. And they did. I mean, they were excited about the product they had. They knew that they didn't know that there was a bourbon renaissance right around the corner, but they knew that they had a good product that people would appreciate. They'd been loving it in Japan and Europe for years.
Right.
So, they basically sold me on it. And I think I left the distillery. I think we might have gone back. Well, anyway, I'd barely gotten on the road, and I got the call with a job offer.
Nice.
But then it was all happening so fast. It took me a while to make the decision. But a week or so later, I just kept putting the recruiter off, asking for another day or two. Finally, it was like, this is it. I've got to make the decision. I put her off for long enough. And truly, when I picked up the phone, when she called, I was standing in the living room with my wife in the house we had just bought. And I looked at her, I was like, what do I say? What do we do? And she's like, I don't know. And when I answered that phone, I really didn't know what I was going to say. And I was like, okay, we'll do it. I'll do it. And if I'd had a crystal ball and had seen what the future was going to be for the brand and for my career at Four Roses, it would have been an easy decision. But I was really just applying and accepting a position in the lab with a brand new company that I'd only known about for about a week. That they were hoping they could expand beyond Kentucky, but really that was all that they could promise, or that's all they knew. That was that they had a good product and they believed in it, and I could sense that. I met Jim and John Ray and a few other guys. I didn't meet Al on my first trip, but I met a lot of the guys in production, and there weren't many people, honestly, at Four Roses at that time. I think I met just about everybody involved in my few hours there.
What did you think when you pulled in? Because I'm assuming you went to Lawrenceburg there, right? Yeah. The interview. So what did you think about that facility? I guess you hadn't seen it, right? You'd seen the other warehouses at Cox's Creek, but you'd not seen the actual. So what your thought process on that one?
I wish I had taken notes, because I'm sure I was pretty much in awe, because if you've seen it, I mean, it's totally out of place in the middle of Kentucky. It's a yellow Spanish mission.
I know, it's crazy. You roll out there and you're like, "What? Yeah. What is this?" I was like,
"What? Make bourbon here?"
Yeah, but it's beautiful. I mean, it's a great location, and I got to spend like 5 or 6 hours in 2000. Was it 20? The last release for the 2019 limited edition I got to spend time out in the neighbor's yard by your by your distillery for about 6 hours in the morning, waiting for that. But it's beautiful out there. The facility, the tour we took, I mean, everything's just, I mean, it's gorgeous out there. So I can't imagine going up there and not really knowing anything, having a home, having a wife, having a job, having a life in Tennessee, and then just, I mean, talk about a leap of faith, man. That's crazy.
Yeah, it really was. We didn't have kids at the time, so
yeah.
We were only responsible for ourselves.
Yeah. So was your wife originally from Kentucky, or was she from Tennessee, or was that?
She's also from Kentucky.
Okay. So that made it a little easier, maybe.
Well, yeah, but ironically, we were both closer to our families and our homes in Nashville than we are here.
Oh no.
I got you. Yeah, that's I never thought about that. You just don't think about that, but
no.
But man, who wants to live in Tennessee? I mean, no way. Especially after you go to Kentucky, Brent. I mean, come on, goodness gracious. But so going back to your college days, what do you remember? Was there anything in particular, or do you remember like the first bourbon you ever drank, or anything, that you drank? I'm assuming you probably went to football games. You had to drink if you went to UK football games. I mean, there was nothing else to do.
Yeah, it was, I can remember the first few times, I drank the standards. I remember drinking, Jim Beam.
Right.
Friends and I would get the handle, the 175, and I always enjoyed that. But it was mostly bourbon and Coke, so I wasn't appreciating it.
Yeah.
But I can remember there were really two moments that kind of changed my mind and my perception of bourbon. One of them was, I can't remember exactly what year it was, maybe 95 or 96. It was shortly after Knob Creek came out.
Oh, yeah.
And I was actually visiting a friend who I grew up with in Kentucky. He was living out in Colorado at the time. But I was out visiting him, and he's like, "You won't believe this." He's like, "They've got some incredible bourbon here." And it was the first time that I'd seen anything that was a small batch, or it was before the small batches and the single barrels were all that popular. It was one of the first ones. So, and I tried that, and it was different. And I was floored by it. And I thought, well, this is something. And just from being from Kentucky and being out of state, and there are other people there, and they're all excited about bourbon and this small batch. It's like, that was the first time, I guess everyone's kind of changed their perception of bourbon now, that it can be something that's appreciated and discussed, and there can be variety from one brand to the other. But prior to that, I didn't look at it that way. I enjoyed it, but I didn't really dive into it. But that really kind of opened my eyes to, the variety and the way it could be produced in smaller batches to be, more boutique and more special. And then the second was actually when I was in Tennessee. My roommate, he started drinking bourbon neat and on the rocks. Yeah. And, I'd probably, and I can't even remember how I drank that, the Knob Creek. I probably shot it. I don't know. But I do remember that, for whatever experience that was, I do remember when I was introduced to sampling and drinking it neat and on the rocks, that really was another moment where that's really when I realized this is my drink. I really, really like bourbon. And then I started enjoying it that way, and enjoying it on a totally different level, with the, exploring the flavor characteristics, trying different labels, new releases, and that sort of thing.
Yeah. It's got to be fun when you're out there in Colorado and you get this friend saying, "Hey, here's this great bourbon from your home state." I mean, to me as a native Kentuckian, that's probably one of the biggest senses of pride that I have, is the ability to say, 95% of the world's bourbon is made in my state. And being from Kentucky, sometimes people may think you're a hillbilly or a little backwards. But then you can say, well, you know what? we make 95% of the world of America's native spirit right here, and we make it better than anybody else. So it's always a sense of pride for me to be able to say that. So, yeah,
you're right. I was very proud of that. It was to have to go halfway across the country to see, but I think it made even, it exemplified the experience even more, being outside of Kentucky, far from home, and then this is from my home. This is something that, as a Kentuckian, I feel part of. and people
Right.
out here enjoying it. Don't know why I didn't discover that while I was in Kentucky, but it probably made it more pronounced.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, I'll tell you what, we're at the end of the first round here. Let's get some final thoughts on the small batch, though. Matt, what do you think on it?
I think Brent, you hit it right on there. The nose really comes through with that fruit, but the spiciness, I'm getting a lot more on the palate. It really helps to round it out. It's got that sweetness from the fruit coming through, but I really, really love the K is my favorite recipe. And anytime you can mix it in, especially with the BK with that higher rye, I just love the spice coming off of it, and it balances really well, I think, with that sweet fruit. I'm getting like a little bit of graham cracker coming off of it as well, and it's got a really great balance, really, really good flavor to it. It's as complex as you wanted. We could sit here and talk about it and analyze it all evening, but it's just really good. It's done really well.
Yeah, I agree, Matt. It's, I like that sweetness that I get off of it, but then it turns into that spiciness as well. It kind of reminds me of like those Brock's cinnamon candy. I say that sometimes about bourbons, but I like it when you get that sweet and really spicy kind of combination. And to me, it comes through as a cinnamon almost. And I really like that spiciness. So yeah, very, very good on this one. And this one's a bottle. I mean, you can find the small batch. You can find that anywhere pretty much, can't you? I mean,
Yeah, you can find this anywhere.
Yep, definitely. All right. Well, guys, I'll tell you what, let's take a quick break, get a word from our sponsor, and then we'll come back with round two with more with Brent Elliott, Master Distiller at Four Roses. So everybody just sit tight and we'll be right back. Spirits of French Lick crafts their spirits using only the finest agricultural product that has defined character, following their motto, respect the grain. They lead the way in representing the quality of the Hoosier artisan distilling process while paying tribute to its inseparable past. By implementing best practices from those early times, combined with modern touches, Spirits of French Lick has created a truly unique place in the industry. Spirits of French Lick products are distributed throughout Indiana, Kentucky, and Missouri, and can also be purchased online through Sealbox at sealbox.com. Visit spiritsoffrenchlick.com to learn more information and make sure to follow them on Facebook and Instagram.
The Stave Restaurant is a bourbon lover's paradise right here in the heart of bourbon country. Located at 5711 McCracken Pike in Millville, Kentucky, between Castle and Key and Woodford Reserve, Chef Kyle Klatka prepares amazing food each day that features an elevated Kentucky-inspired cuisine. With a full-service bar, great bourbon flights, and signature cocktails, the Stave is the perfect place to catch up with friends after a fun-filled day of touring local distilleries. Be sure to check them out online at thestavekentucky.com or at Instagram and Facebook at The Stave Kentucky.
All right, everybody, welcome back for round and/or session or period two after last week with Ed Belfour, the hockey player. So whatever you want to call it, we're back. And of course, with me as always is my good friend, my toque beanie toboggan wearing buddy, Matt. Matt, how you doing over there?
Hey, Mark, I'm doing great, man. How are you doing? You have a good time in round session period one?
Yeah. Are you kidding me, man? It's four roses. I mean, you can't go wrong with four roses. And this one, man, I'm telling you, this next round, this is well, I don't want to spoil it yet, but man, this is one when it came out was just like, wow. I mean, so I'm really excited to get to taste this one with Brent. So Brent, if you want to jump back in and kind of tell everybody what we've got poured up for this second round, that'd be great.
Okay, what we're looking at here is small batch select.
All right.
And this is relatively new for us. I mentioned the small batch came out in 2006. And that was kind of the beginning of the small batch platform, which for us is utilizing our different recipes to showcase our uniqueness and what all we can do. But it was 2006 to 2019. That was a time period between major releases. We'd done limited editions and private barrels and
right.
that sort of thing. But we hadn't put out a permanent product in all those years. So with this, and when we started out in 19, we didn't go nationwide. We're still not nationwide with this.
Okay.
But we started to have enough inventory and we had the formulation. We had the idea for, what we wanted the product to be. So we went ahead and launched in 5 states. And then last year, I think we added 13 or 14. And then by the end of this year, we'll be in 30 states. But this was really, we were trying to, beyond just create something different and show how we can create different recipes or different flavors with the recipes, we wanted to kind of give the consumer something that they couldn't get every day with Four Roses. And, the modern consumer is looking for barrel strength. That's a big one that
Sure.
people enjoy a lot, and non-chill filtered. Now, we didn't go barrel strength because with a product like this, it's hard to batch everyone and write the proof on the label. So from the test blends, I selected 104 proof. It's high enough that we don't have to chill filter it. And I think for this product, I think that's just the sweet spot for the proof. And, I enjoy high proof bourbons, but my sweet spot's typically somewhere between like 104, 108.
Okay.
In most cases. And there are exceptions to everything. And certainly when you're talking about bourbon barrels, there's a lot of exception. But this is a combination of 6 of the recipes. It's the 2 Ks, Matt, so you should be happy about that.
Yes, sir.
And again, this one, it's not the dominant flavor or the dominant recipe. If you look at the percentages, it has both V recipes, the high rye V and the lower rye, or relatively lower rye V. And with the V, you get nice, delicate fruit. You hit the nail on the head, Matt, when you were saying, berries, fruit. That's exactly what I see with the O yeast strain. It's a very rich, ripe, bright red fruit. With the V strain, it's more subtle. For me, I get more pears, and I get apricot a lot with the V, and maybe some green apple. So you've got that component. And then what I really think makes this one special is the F yeast strain, which is the one that creates the herbal, kind of clove-like, minty flavors. And this was really the F and the V, the way they work together. I think that combination is so unique. And really the first time we did that, I think we used the F in the 2014 limited edition. I can't remember if there was any V in it, but if so, that was kind of an accident. But with Al's 50th, when we came out with that, that was really, I think, what created a lot of the magic. That, and there was a 23-year-old batch in that also. But that unique fruit, that mint and that delicate fruit really came together in such a way that I wanted to recapture that. And so much so that I kind of did the same thing in 18. And then when we went on to release this, sort of played with that same combination there. And it's interesting because anytime I'm doing a test blend or, formulating like limited editions, all the different recipes, they're all like different tools in a tool chest. And if I'm looking to extend the finish or increase the mouthfeel, it's always the V or the F that to me really do that. They really have that rich flavor that just coats your palate and just seems to hang on. And so with this one, I think that's just a double dose of that. You've got the F, the V, they create that unique flavor. And then to me, it just coats my palate and the finish just lasts forever. And of course, with being non-chill filtered and higher proof, it's denser, it's heavier, it's richer. So this one we're very proud of. And
oh yeah, it's funny. I remember when this was being launched in 2019, and Mark Combs and I had connected through Instagram, and actually, you guys had done a Valentine's dinner at the Stave restaurant out in Millville.
yeah.
And Mark came out and had several different of your expressions, and I knew this was coming out, and I was like, oh, please let him have it. And he didn't have it. So we stayed in touch and connected. And just before it came out, he was able to get me a sample bottle of it to try. And it was just absolutely blew me away. So I was really excited when I was able to get the actual bottles. And I'm glad, being in Kentucky, I know, like you said, the distribution's not countrywide yet, but anytime I can walk into a store and pick up a bottle of this, I mean, it's great. This stuff is, to me, it's a great bourbon. And I'm happy that it's available on a regular basis here in Kentucky for sure. So Matt, with all that said, man, I'm rambling on. What you picking up on this one?
I think so. I don't think I know this is a favorite of the Bourbon Life podcast between you and I, Mark. And
yes,
every time we get to drink this, I always just love going back to it. This is such a great addition to the Four Roses lineup, and the nose on it really does. It really does let some of those recipes shine through. The delicate fruit of the V, I'm picking up like a little bit of raisin, and some of that apricot that you were talking about comes through as well. on the nose, and then the F. The F is another favorite of mine, and we're not at the palate on this one, but that's where I really find the F shines is on the palate. But I get a little bit of something herbal, like a little bit of clover, a touch of mint on it as well, and then that K. I don't know if I'm smelling and bringing too much on the nose forth with the K, but I know it's going to be there on the palate and the finish. But it's just got a really great inviting nose, but different from the small batch where it had that really nice, bright, juicy fruit that just it really comes through and is really pronounced. This is a little more delicate, a little more subtle and different. But I know that once we get into the palate with it, it's going to really shine.
Oh yeah. So Brent, we talked a bit about you in our first session. So let's kind of shift gears a little bit and talk about Four Roses, and of course, you can't be a Four Roses fan without the official Four Roses history book itself. So, but yeah, tell us a little bit about the history and the distillery itself.
Well, I mentioned that we had just come back to the U.S. in 2002, and I guess I should go further back than that. That's sort of the recent history of Four Roses, but the brand goes way back, back actually to Atlanta, Georgia, in the 1880s. And our founder, his name was Paul Jones Jr. He was selling bourbon down in Georgia, and he packed up and he brought his family and his brand up to Kentucky, and he trademarked the name Four Roses in 1888. And I don't know if you've heard the legend, but as legend has it, he was smitten by a lovely Southern belle, and she said he proposed marriage to her. She said, "Okay, if my answer is yes, I will wear a corsage of roses to the upcoming ball." And she did, obviously. And so he named his brand Four Roses, to commemorate or to honor the lovely Southern belle. And he continued selling bourbon from Kentucky, out of Whiskey Row, up to and through Prohibition. And as you know, prior to Prohibition, there were hundreds of distilleries, brands, and so we could have been lost to history. But we were fortunate enough that Paul Jones, he acquired a license to sell Four Roses for medicinal purposes. One of just a handful of brands. So
that's what I use it for too, Brent. So
yeah, I don't know why we got away from that. I guess Big Pharma elbowed us out. I don't know what's going on.
It's the perfect cure for a Monday.
Yeah, it is.
The brand, it sort of stayed in the public's consciousness all through Prohibition, and then after Prohibition, it quickly became one of the top selling bourbons in the U.S. And in that time period also, which didn't hurt us a bit, was Seagram's, the huge Canadian company that is no more, but they prospered immensely after Prohibition. They were poised for it. They had all the distilleries and the stocks up in Canada. So Seagram's in 1943 they bought the brand, and they were huge by that point and only growing bigger. So they helped propel Four Roses even further. And that was great for Four Roses up until the late 50s. And then they did something interesting. They took Four Roses, the bourbon, off the U.S. market, and they focused it all in Europe and Japan. Now, they kept the name Four Roses because it had a lot of recognition, but they put it on their Canadian-style blended whiskey.
Huh, okay.
And looking back, even Al Young didn't know exactly why they did that. I think there were, we can kind of surmise the reasoning behind it. One big one was the tastes of the consumer. They were changing a lot. They were going more towards the lighter spirits, the vodkas, the gins. And a Canadian blended whiskey is much lighter than the rich, full-bodied straight bourbon. So I think that was one reason. The other piece of it was if you're making a blended whiskey, there's only a part of that blend that actually has to be aged straight bourbon whiskey. Okay. So what that does for you is you can just stretch your inventory much further. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of a business move. And, Seagram's a Canadian company, so they probably really appreciated or had held those blended whiskeys in high regard. So it was good for the brand overseas because we were, a major bourbon early on over in Japan and Europe, and we still are today because of that. But it really hurt us here in the U.S. Initially it was a good blended whiskey initially, as good as they can be, I guess. And but over time, the quality and the reputation just declined.
Yeah.
To the point where it was basically bottom shelf mixing whiskey. By the time
right.
this modern history comes to be, so that was. But fortunately for us, in 2002, 2001, 2002, in that time period, Seagram started selling everything off, and because we were sold in Japan, we had we had a relationship with Kirin. They were distributing all Four Roses in Japan for years, and really they just didn't want to lose the rights to distribute. So that was really their motivation for coming and purchasing the brand.
Okay.
But in this time period from the 90s, late 90s up until 2002, Jim Rutledge had been trying to get Seagram's to bring Four Roses, the bourbon, back to the U.S. And obviously that wasn't going anywhere. But Kirin, they were open to that idea. And that was the first question he asked them when the transition started to happen. And so we came back to Kentucky only, just like I was saying, just a few thousand cases, growing a little bit each year. And, then I started in 2005. And honestly, since I started, there hasn't been a dull moment. I mean, every year it's just all about trying to keep up with demand, trying to maintain the quality and keep everyone happy. So it's been a super exciting 15 years for me.
Yeah.
But it's an old brand.
Yeah, I mean, it's got a tremendous amount of history. And I held up the book that was written. I guess Al actually wrote that book, if I remember correctly.
Oh yeah.
So that's a cool little book. He autographed that one for me, so I'll hold on to that one for forever, as long as I can, obviously. But yeah, I mean, it's crazy that that's the thing I've always wondered is what was the business decision, and obviously you explained that pretty well. So it makes sense, but it's still just kind of one of those things you think, wow, but you never know. I mean, if they'd stayed here, then Four Roses might not be what it is today. But now with you talked about the growth, obviously, I mean, you guys are just like growing like gangbusters. So what is that like, being at the helm of this brand that is growing like this and trying to meet the consumer demand and keep these products, and meeting consumers' expectations?
Well, it's a lot of fun. It's people ask me a lot, right when I took over, what's it like? You have some big shoes to fill, and it's almost like they were trying to scare me. And I was always like, it's like that part. If you look at the production of bourbon whiskey, it's not one person. There's not continuity loss. I could, decide I want to go back and start making glue tomorrow, and Four Roses is still going to be made. It's still going to be good Four Roses, and we're going to maintain the continuity of it, just because we have so much experience. A great team that we've got generations of people working in there that know exactly what they're doing. So with all of that, it's like, well, I'm not really worried about that. We're going to continue to make good whiskey. I'm going to keep doing what I've been doing, and at the time I'd been doing quality control, which was touches just kind of every piece of the process, the fun parts and some of the more like the whole spectrum.
Right.
So it's like, I'm going to keep doing what I was doing before. I'm not going to change what I'm doing. The process is going to keep going on. But if now that you're putting it that way, maybe I should be nervous when people ask me that. And so, that kind of got into my head a little bit. But I'll tell you honestly, the only part I was really nervous about was, I realized that the role of the modern master distiller has a lot of the PR side. There are a lot of PR functions,
right?
And prior to speaking in front of people about bourbon, my only experience with that was like doing book reports in school or even like toasts at weddings. Things that maybe I was kind of winging it. I wasn't prepared for,
Right.
And so I thought, I can't do this. I'm petrified of speaking in front of people. It's just not my thing. But it turns out, I guess, if I'm just talking about something that I know well and just like basically talking about what I did today or, what I do
Right.
every day, it's
Right.
like, well, okay, that I can do that. And I still, it's not my ideal day to talk in front of 300 people. But once I start, I end up enjoying it, just because, and a lot of it's, the people that I'm talking to. People, it's not like people are being forced to sit through a seminar. People
Right.
want to learn about it.
Yeah, you have
Right.
a captive audience. It's
Yep.
Yeah.
easy to grab people's attention when they're passionate about what you're passionate about, and you're sharing that passion with each other.
Yeah, exactly. So it makes it easy. And the part that I really feared the most or thought that I have the most trouble with is one of the parts that I enjoy the most. Getting to share it and talk to people and feel that energy and feel those questions. I really enjoy that part of the job now.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'm sure over the last year, it's been difficult with everything, locked down and changes and, people not being able to get out and do things. So I'm sure that, as a master distiller, I guess in the first round, we kind of talked about a little bit about it, but there's probably not a typical day in the life of a master distiller, but just the roles, the things that you do. Can you kind of just talk a little bit about what that entails on a regular basis for you?
Yeah, you said it. There are no 2 days that are identical. There are things that I have to do consistently. One of which, I'm still the director of quality, so I have
Right.
to watch all the quality process from the beginning to the end, which is fantastic because that keeps my finger on the pulse of everything that's going on, and ultimately making sure that what comes off the still is of the right quality, what goes into each bottle is the right quality, and the part of quality control that really they don't really teach you in quality control seminars or courses is if you're doing quality control for bourbon, that means you smell and you taste it. So that really that's really the fun side of quality control, because I am involved a lot in I do a lot of blending and barrel selections, um, both for standard products, pulling test blends, making sure that they're correct, doing special blends for limited editions, blending up new products like small batch select.
Yeah.
So it's and I do a lot of and because I'm in charge of what barrels and what batches go into what products, that's kind of married to inventory control, and I can't really pull apart from that. So I manage the inventory and do like production planning. So I actually spend a lot of time balancing the inventory, moving batches around, making sure the flavor's right, trying to make sure we have enough product or enough batches of particular recipes to meet the
Right.
demand of the different products. And it's taken a lot of my time in the last couple of years because turns out the demand is higher than anyone thought.
Yeah, I can only imagine how much that's really changed and how much time it's taking up here. You take a brand and bring it back over here to the US, and it's absolutely taking off like no one's business.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, you're taxed with kind of the best problem you could have, where your
Yeah.
demand is far exceeding supply, and trying to figure out the balance of it, and while still maintaining the high reputation and the quality of the product.
Yeah, that's the challenge. And especially we've been expanding a lot in the last couple of years. We doubled
Right.
the size of our distillery. We're adding warehouses. We've added a new bottling line. So there's always a moving target. Nothing. Like I said, we're always just trying to keep up and to do all of that and maintain the same process and not to have quality slip, not to have any difference between how we're making it today versus 3 years ago. That's challenging.
Yeah. And, so I was going to ask that too, because the first one we tasted a small batch, it's a blend of 4 different recipes. And then this one's a blend of 6 different recipes. So it's not like you're taking one recipe from 300 barrels or 200 barrels or whatever and blending that together to try to find this consistency. You're taking barrels that have, 4 or 6 different recipes and finding that right combination. And I'm assuming, you've got that target taste, that profile that you're shooting for. So that's got to add an additional depth of complexity to that.
It does, yeah. And yeah, I enjoy that. That's shortly after I started. Like when I started, I was in the lab. That's why I didn't mention that. That's what I got hired for, was just to run analysis. But at the time, there were so few of us in management and production that I kind of had the opportunity to pitch in and kind of help wherever. And that's when I started getting more involved in the distillery, bottling, and blending. That was one of the first things, or mingling as we call it, because we try to stay away from blended whiskey, any connotation that might remind people we were blended whiskey. So I started mingling early on, and that is interesting. I mean, to bring bourbons together, and a lot of times you can assume, or you have this idea of how different batches or barrels will come together, and more often than not, you're surprised. So there's, I kind of left science behind, and it kind of got more into the art of it. And I think the unpredictability of it, and the surprises, that makes it art. You can't. There's no instrument that can tell you if it's good. It can tell you what all the different pieces are in there down to parts per billion or finer, but it can't tell you if it's good. You've got to make these test blends, do a lot of comparisons and tastings and smellings, and it's a really fun part of my job.
I know, Brent, if you guys ever need an extra hand or two or palate or two, Matt and I, would be more than happy to, come out and sample taste and, help you hit the mark on those profiles.
I appreciate the offer. Thank you.
So Brent, was there a point where, you take this job with this company you really don't know much about, you move up here from Tennessee, you leave your home, you bring your wife with you, kind of a whole new start back in your home state. Was there a point that you thought, man, I could actually be at the helm of this ship at some point? I mean, was there a moment for you that realization started to actually kind of sink in or come to your thought process?
I remember initially, when I took the job, the idea of that happening wasn't strong enough, or I didn't believe in it enough to have it sway my decision. But I remember before I really knew Jim, I thought that might be a possibility. It's maybe, wouldn't it be cool? This thing takes off. There aren't many people in production. I could really have a shot at this. But then once I got to Four Roses and met Jim, he always sort of joked about retirement, but I was like, no, he's never going to retire. So, I never really even allowed myself to think that. Because it's I'm just setting myself up for disappointment.
Sure.
And so, I never really counted on it. Maybe, occasionally would think, wouldn't that be something? Yeah. But I never really allowed myself to seriously consider that as, possible future for myself.
Yeah. So now how many of your college buddies call you up on a regular basis and say, hey, man, now that you're there, can you hook me up with this? And
yeah, I'd be lying if I said it hadn't happened in time.
I'm sure. I can only imagine. Yeah, no doubt about it. Well, guys, we're actually at the end here of session 2, but before we wrap this up, let's get back and Matt, talk about the palate and finish on this one. I know you talked briefly about it earlier, so why don't you tell them what you're getting on that?
The palate on this one screams at that F recipe, the herbal and the minty. I think for me, it's just got this really, really great long minty herbal finish to it. It's very, very recognizable. I think every time I've had it, it leaves the mouth coated. Really nice baking spice of the higher rye recipe coming through with it that leads way into that mintiness, and then herbs on the end. It's an absolute success in my opinion.
Yeah, this is the finish. It's the gift that keeps on giving, Clark. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's like you drink it, it just keeps going on and on and on. But yeah, you hit the nail on the head on that one, Matt. Just a great combination. A little bit of the spiciness to me again, but then that mintiness kicks in. Different from that small batch, which was to me kind of a cinnamony red hot type of deal. This one's just, it's still spicy from the rye, but just a different kind of spiciness to me. Like you said, maybe some baking spices on there. But yeah, I'm like I said, man, I was a huge fan of this one, and I think this is probably one of my favorite bottles. Al, you can't read it because it's backwards, but Al in I guess it was August or September of 19 after this came out, he was at Liquor Barn here in Lexington, and I just stopped by because I knew that he was going to be over there doing a release, so I got him to sign this bottle for me. So he probably wouldn't appreciate the fact that I'm never going to open this and drink it, but but that's my plan. I'm going to hold on to that bottle for quite a while. But yeah, this was 2019 for sure was my favorite release, and definitely enjoy this one on a regular basis. So, all right. So with that said, let's close out this session, get a word from our sponsor, and we'll be back with our third and final session with Brent Elliott, the master distiller at Four Roses. So everybody just sit tight, and we'll be right back.
Three Chords line of whiskeys embody the spirit of creativity. The whiskey is a true collaboration between producer and composer Neil Giraldo and master blender distiller Ari Sussman. The Three Chord team of expert blenders, coopers, and sensory professionals have developed a multi-step process they call Perfectly Tuned Taste. This process begins by carefully selecting the finest bourbon and rye whiskeys from Kentucky, Tennessee, and Indiana, and then blending them together. Find out more about the whiskeys and distribution in your area at www.threechordbourbon.com.
All right, everybody, welcome back for the third and final session, round period, whatever you want to call it, of the Bourbon Life Podcast. I'm your host, Mark, and with me, as always, is my good friend, Matt. Matt, you made it to the final round, man. How you feeling over there?
Oh, I'm doing great, Mark. I'm doing great. I'm so happy that we are making it through. We just had one of our favorites in the last round, the small batch select. Yeah. That was like a Bourbon Life big hit with us. It really caught us off guard. I remember the first time I had it, I think, was with you.
Yeah, I think so.
We were both just blown away.
Yes, sir. Yeah, so I was happy to be able to share that with you. But yeah, I knew after Mark gave me that sample just before it came out, I was like, yeah, this is a real deal. So we are moving on to this is a big surprise, not a big surprise, but man, this is another good one. So Brent, you want to tell everybody what we have poured up for this third and final round?
Yeah, this is going to be another small batch. The difference here is this is the limited edition, the 2020 version.
Oh yeah. And hey, just so everybody knows, these products were not provided to us. These are products that I have purchased on my own, which is not a problem because I'm going to buy these, anytime I get the chance to buy these, especially these limited editions, if I'm lucky enough. And this year, well, Matt, you were lucky enough this year too. You went home for Christmas, man, and walked into a liquor store and was just talking to the guy, right? Was that?
Yeah. If you're in Michigan and you love Four Roses, Tippin's Market in Ann Arbor is the place. They always take care of me, and they've got pretty deep ties with Four Roses. So
yeah, you walked in, the guy's like, hey, would you be interested in something? Hold on. He like goes to the back and comes back. He's like, I got this. Do you think you'd like that?
Yeah, well, that was just one of the many bottles I ended up buying that day. But anyway.
Yeah, I lucked out too because I never win these lotteries. These liquor stores have these lotteries and these things and whatnot, and I never ever win. And I actually won Liquor Barn's lottery this year and got the 2020. So I was disappointed that I didn't get to go out there and sit in the neighbor's yard at the distillery out there in Lawrenceburg at 3:00 in the morning, which was a lot of fun the year before. But I was happy to pick this one up. So Brent, you want to tell everybody some more details about this 2020 limited edition?
Yeah, this is something we do every September. We release this, and it's another extension on the whole small batch concept, or showcasing what we can do with different recipes. Yeah. The big difference here is this is always non-chill filtered, and this one's barrel strength. So basically, dump the barrels, put it in the bottle. And for this one, it's a combination of 4 recipes. It's a 12-year-old OESV, which is the low rye with the V yeast strain. A 12-year-old OBSV, which is the same recipe as a single barrel. It's a high rye with the delicate fruity yeast strain. Then a 16-year-old OESK, which is the low rye with the spicy yeast. Okay. And then I think what really sort of sets this one apart is 20% of this is a 19-year-old OBSK.
Oh, wow.
Which is that one Matt was talking about, the high rye and that spicy yeast strain. So,
Yeah, I knew that was in here, that 19 years. So 20% of it is that recipe?
yeah, which is really high for us. I've
Yeah,
dabbled in using some of the older stuff in several different limited editions, like Al's 50th. We use that 23-year-old, but that
right.
wasn't even 10%. And that's always a challenge is because oak's one of those things everybody thinks they like it. And some people love a whole lot of oak, a lot of very old bourbons. Um, the way I see it is old bourbons, they have some good characteristics, but you take the good with the bad. A lot of times you get some astringency or some flatness.
Right.
It's not always just age equates to quality. There's definitely a breaking point. So really the challenge with this one was trying to blend in that 19-year-old. And I never would have thought 20% would have worked. Just sit here and put some 19-year-old in there. You're like, okay, maybe we can make it work if the batches meld and mesh just right. Maybe at 5-10%. But this one, to me, it really works. There's a lot of oak, there's no doubt, but it's not flat, it's not astringent, it's not bitter.
Right.
You get that elegant oak. It's an undertone. It's in the finish. But you can still pick up all of the vibrant flavors from, there were some vibrant flavors in that batch also, but a lot of the vibrant flavors from the 16-year-old and the 2 12-year-old batches. So you've got layers in there. You've got the different fruits, you got the spice. And to me, I think that's really what makes a really good bourbon, something that you drink, you take 2 different drinks. If you're looking for spice in one sip and looking for fruit in the next or oak in the next, you can see all that because it's complex. It's not one dimensional at all.
Yeah, yeah, and it's not it's not out of balance either, because sometimes when you get these special releases or special editions or whatnot, you might get something that's really kind of out of balance to one way or another, whether it's sweet or whether it's oak or whether it's whatever. But with this, I mean, you just don't get that. I mean, you get a very, like you said, it's very complex, but it's still a very balanced bourbon, in my opinion. So, Matt, I see you sniffing it over there. What are you picking up on it?
Initially, I got a good whiff of the oak. Maybe it was just the first time I went into the glass, but a good nose on the oak that really came through. I picked up like a little bit of leather with it. I think some of the age gave way to leather, but now as I'm going back, it's got nice like dark stone fruit. I'm picking up like some fig and like maybe a little raisin or like a currant. I'm thinking of like some softer dark fruits, and there's a little bit of the spice coming through on it as well. A little bit of like just a soft baking spice. Certainly nothing like pumpkin pie season here, but there's just like a little bit of the rye grain, like a fresh baked grain coming through with it as well.
Brent, now you see why Matt's on the show. He's the brains.
That's impressive.
Yeah. Yeah. I just sit here and just ask questions, and Matt's the one that's got the palate and the ability to throw out these tasting notes. And to me, I smell it and it's like, I get almost like a brown sugar off of this one, which might sound kind of crazy, but the sweetness to me kind of translates into almost a brown sugary sweetness on the nose. So that's my story. I'm going to stick with that, Brent.
It's a good story. I like it.
So, we talked about your history and how you got there to Four Roses. We talked a little bit about the history of the Four Roses as well. So let's talk a little bit, kind of switch gears, and let's talk a little bit of technical stuff. So now you guys have your warehouses. You talked about the fact that when you first got to when you were driving through Bardstown before, or outside of Bardstown, you saw the warehouses. Now you guys are all single story warehouses. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So what's the theory, just so our listeners understand, what's the thought process behind single story warehouses? Because most people, when you go to the distillery, they're used to seeing these 6, 7, 8, whatever, 9 floor rick houses where barrels are aged. So what's the story with that?
Well, I'll tell you, it makes my job much easier. Keeping track of 10 different flavor profiles.
Yeah.
So that's 10 different or 10 degrees there of difference. Then you have the other axis of time. So you've got different ages on all the barrels. So it's already pretty complex. But if you have a multi-tiered warehouse, and a lot of people use it to their advantage, but for us, we've already got enough to try to manage. So by design, we have the single story because the temperatures don't vary as much.
Right.
A barrel from the first tier won't be as different from a barrel in the sixth tier as one of those multi-tiered warehouses. Because if you're looking at the aging in a barrel, so much goes on, and just about everything is dependent on the temperature. You've got reactions that take place, and chemistry, heat, energy that forces reactions. The hotter it is, the more pressure is going to be in that barrel, the more it's going to go into the wood. The more extracts you're going to get, the more the deeper wood extracts you're going to get. So you're going to see a big difference depending on what the environment was for a barrel. And if you have heat rises. So if you have a really tall warehouse, all that heat's going to be at the top,
right,
and at the bottom it's going to be a much different environment. And ours, we're looking at maybe 7-8 degree temperature difference from the bottom to the top in the hotter months.
Okay.
The multi-tiered warehouses, I haven't been in those with thermometer, but from what I understand, it could be 30 plus degrees from the bottom to the top. So for us, it's very consistent, and that's important because we want to control the flavors with the recipes.
Yep. And you guys, I mean, they're not climate controlled either, right? Because I know some distilleries use climate control, so yours are not. Is that right?
Right.
Or,
yeah.
Yeah.
We open the windows in the summer. Close in the winter,
go.
so that's about as climate control as we get.
So you guys, I think I read somewhere you're up to what is like warehouse Y. Is that right?
Yeah, we have 22 warehouses now.
Yeah. That's yeah. So what kind of capacity? Just so people have an idea, what kind of capacity are we talking on that?
Filled to 100%, they're about 24,000 each.
Gotcha.
But we can't keep them that full. We try to operate about 80% if possible. Just because we put them in as batches, and a batch is 280, 290 barrels. And we'd like to be able to keep all those together. So you need a fair amount of empty space at all times to be able to work efficiently, with entry and withdrawal. So 22 warehouses. I haven't done the math, or I have, but I don't have it off the top of my head what that would be.
Yeah, I was going to
say,
we're
not totally full yet. We're filling them up fast because that's the thing.
You got a degree in chemistry. Did you know you're going to have a master's degree in mathematics to go along with that, just to keep track of everything?
Would have paid more attention in multiplication if I'd known that. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no doubt. MA 109 or MA whatever they were, the calculus 123, whatever those classes were back in the day.
So one of the things I'm going to transfer here and segue into something, if you don't mind, Mark. But one of the things that
you've got carte blanche, Matt. Do as you wish.
Oh, what a guy! Before we just sit here and we keep chatting away, I really want to make sure that we touch on your single barrel program, because that's one of the places that I think that all of the 10 recipes really shine, and that's a way that you get to really show off each individual recipe. So do you want to talk about the single barrel program that you have with different stores and shops, and how that process works, and the way that they can to get into that and really show all the different recipes?
Yeah, that's a very interesting program, and it's been very good for us. And it's really something that was more, I guess, consumer driven. By that I mean, like, the first barrel we did was for the Party Source up in Northern Kentucky.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if you guys know Jay Arizman, but
he was on the show last year, as a matter of fact. Yeah.
Well, he's come down to Four Roses a lot. This was before the bourbon boom. He's been interested in all spirits for a long, long time, and he was fascinated by our different recipes. And so back when I was managing the sensory lab, I got to know Jake because he'd come down all the time, just want to taste the recipes. And he was begging us to sell the Party Source just one recipe. And we thought, well, he's onto something. It's a pretty good idea. And so that was kind of where it all began. And we hadn't figured it out yet. I think we said, okay, we'll sell it to you, but we're going to cut it down to 100 proof.
Right.
Barrel strength, I'm sure a few people were doing it. A lot of people in the Scotch world at the time, but in bourbon, it wasn't prevalent. So we'll cut it to 100 proof. We'll do it that way. And then more people started asking for it, and it sort of grew from that. It wasn't really like we didn't go in one year and say, okay, we've got a strategy. Let's showcase all of our recipes and we'll sell it. We'll do this, 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 and this. It just kind of grew from that demand, and people got so excited about it that kind of took on a life of its own. And it's evolved many times. How we manage the program, between now and then. But it's been fantastic for us. We and by that I mean like that was so long ago we weren't even putting, because it's 8 to 12-year-old barrels. So only now are we getting to that area where we were actually putting barrels away in anticipation of selling them 8 to 12 years later.
Wow.
Because you always have to be looking ahead. So we were just sort of pulling excess barrels from wherever they weren't being used. And of course they have to be very interesting or very good barrels that really exemplify that particular recipe to even be in the program. So, it's been a lot of hunting for the barrels, hunting for the batches, offering them that way. So we've really just tried to keep it interesting as it's grown. Again, trying to just keep up. But, for a while there initially, we'd send out samples to retailers. We'd say, okay, you're interested in a barrel and you're in New Mexico. Okay, we'll send you 10 barrel samples. Try to select within 2 weeks, because we can't do anything with these 10 barrels while they're sitting at your store and you're making a selection.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So if you do the math on that, we basically have to have 10 times the inventory that we plan to bottle to manage it effectively that way. So as it grew, we're like, well, we can't continue to do this. So then it was, well, let's do more in-house, and we're going to build a barrel selection room. We're going to make it an experience. And that's what we've done. So now we have, it was a little different during COVID. It was kind of challenging, but, pre-COVID, and we're starting to get back to it now, where we might have 2 retailers in every day of the week.
Wow.
And they're coming from all over. And we roll out as many recipes. We don't always have all 10 recipes available at all times, but as many as we have, we roll out, and they can select not only, there are differences from barrel to barrel, but of course with ours, it's barrel to barrel and it's recipe to recipe or year to year. And so people really responded to that. And so we're not only, showing people our uniqueness and giving them the chance to try different recipes, but, we're giving the consumer something that's really exciting, something that they really can, it's an experience is what
Sure.
it is.
Yeah, it kind of grown to almost a cult-like status. I mean, it's kind of, really, because I'm on Instagram, the Bourbon Life, we've got like 48,000 followers on there, but every day I'm on there looking to see what people are posting and things, and a day never goes by that somebody's not talking about, hey, this is available here, this is available there. Pick up this recipe. This is a single barrel. It's 9 years old. Here's a single barrel. It's 13 years old. They've got this at the distillery today. Go out to Lawrenceburg. It's, a 12-year-old Brent Elliott pick, it's crazy, and people are just, they display their 10 selections, and it's like a badge of honor once they finally collect that 10th single barrel of all the recipes. I mean, it's really amazing what you guys have been able to do. But I'm sure that kind of throws a wrench in the gears for the other production, because you've got this huge demand, these people that are wanting these single barrels and things, but you still got to keep your production for the other products that you're doing. So that's got to be tough.
Yeah, it's a tough balance. And for people listening that are really into the program, you guys probably know, like, all the recipes, like I mentioned, aren't always there. And in particular, the OBSK and the OESO are kind of in short supply. And I always explain to people, we didn't know it was going to take off like this. That's one thing. But we also didn't know that small batch was going to take off the way it has.
Right.
And fortunately or unfortunately, they share those recipes. And an OBSK or an OESO, it's 6 and it's 7 years before it's 8 to 12 years. So when it hits that age range and it's really fruity and really spicy, it's typically used up in small batch. We try to set aside as much as we can. But that's just one example of that challenge, and it is challenging to balance all that and try to produce as much good stuff as we can to satisfy everyone.
Oh yeah, I just can't imagine trying to keep up with all that. Sorry, I got my small batch down the wrong pipe. Ooh. So, earlier we've kind of talked a little bit about Al. We mentioned Al Young. Can you talk a little bit about Al and, working with him and sorry guys, what that was like?
Oh yeah. Well, you guys have met Al. He was fantastic. I mean, Four Roses, it's not the same without him for sure. When I started, he was that was before he'd started in his role as a brand ambassador, which I always joke that was the role he was born to play. I don't know if you know, but he had a history. I mean, his background was in theater.
No,
And
I did not know that.
Yeah, when he was young, basically,
Huh.
he used to tell the story a lot, and he and his wife would tell the story. But I guess he had to find a job, and so he instead of he'd done some theater, and I think he did throughout his life, but he got a job with Seagram's, and so when I met him, I didn't know him as I knew him as the interesting Al, the storyteller, very kind, very helpful. He was the distillery manager when I started, so he was one of the go-to guys that would help me out, show me the ropes, teach me things. So that was my first. That's how my relationship with Al started. Was just him being one of my mentors at Four Roses.
Yeah.
But that didn't last very long because I started in 2005. I think it was maybe 2008. He got into the role of brand ambassador, and which as good as he was at distillery manager, I mean, or to be the ambassador, I couldn't have a better ambassador. He not only he was a history buff. I mean, all things history, Four Roses included. There's the proof right there. The book that he wrote. He literally wrote the book on Four Roses. So, not only did he know history, but with his personality and his love for the theatric. I mean, he could tell the stories.
Yeah.
And I would love listening to him. I always feel bad, like people that are traveling with me, or I try to keep things interesting. I don't want to just be like, tell this part of the story, this part that, try to, mix it up some. And I think a lot of that I learned from Al, but I heard him talk, hundreds of times, and it was never the same story twice. He would always spin it, and, the facts always stayed the same, but the way he would present it, he always kept it interesting because, he loved it that much. And he wasn't, he hadn't just learned it all just from reading a book. He had talked to the people, he'd done the research, he traveled. I mean, he really dug in, he really loved it. And so I think everyone that Al met, I mean, of course, everyone that worked with him, he touched all of us deeply. We all miss him. And, it was very tough. I mean, surreal for the longest time, that Al could be gone. But, the people that he met, people want to talk about him all the time. And I love to talk about it. I love to reminisce. And, it makes me happy because, the people that he met, whether it was, when he was traveling, talking Four Roses, or he would just stop and take the time and entertain, educate, and everyone had a fun time, being involved and learning from him. So I mean, he had a special gift, and I was very fortunate to get to know him, be friends with him, and work with him for many years.
Yeah, I mean, Matt and I got to meet him at another Four Roses event at downtown at Goodfellas Pizzeria here in Lexington, and Mark was down there, and he invited me and Matt to come down, and it was kind of funny. It ended up that Matt and I got to sit at the same table, just hanging out with Al and his wife Gretchen for like 3 or 4 hours. I mean, we just sat there and got to listen to Al, and it was really more Gretchen that night, just telling stories about their family and about Al's early life, and it was just a great experience to get to sit and listen to him and how genuine he was. And then saw him again there in September at Liquor Barn here in Lexington, and got that bottle with him, and then got to see him at the Christmas party over there in Louisville in 2019, just before he passed. So just a great guy. I only got to meet him 3 times, but just absolutely loved the time I got to spend with him. So it was a lot of fun. So
a case in point, you met him 3 times, and he made that strong of an impression.
No, there's no doubt about it. He definitely did. So kind of switching gears here, let's because we're getting close to the end, but let's talk about the future. talk about Four Roses. Brent Elliott, what future for you? Future for Four Roses? What's coming up?
Well, I feel like we're still kind of in the middle of promoting the small batch select. That was a really big release for us,
Sure.
and we're still not nationwide. So as far as new products, there's really nothing on the horizon. At the distillery, there's some exciting things going on. We are expanding our visitor center. We're building a totally new visitor experience, trying to elevate the experience. That should be complete by the end of the year. We are also going to start offering the small batch and the small batch select in 50 milliliter sizes.
Okay.
Which will be great. I'm thinking, like we've done tonight, comparing the two side by side. Everybody doesn't want to, and maybe someone hasn't had Four Roses before, might be a little bit leery of buying two 750s.
Right.
To compare them if they've never tried and they're not familiar with Four Roses. But it's a great opportunity to get the two and taste the differences.
Makes airline travel that much better.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, there's no downside to the 50 mils. So, and of course we're going to do a limited edition. I just finished up the test blends for that a few weeks ago. So,
nice. Glad to hear that.
Very excited about this one. But again, the big challenge is always just, even though we've expanded, we are still not at 100% capacity. So there's still a lot of moving parts, a lot of change going on, even at the distillery. Prior to the expansion, we had two speeds, and it was either off or on. So the original 24 fermenters or half our production, that's always on. The second half of the distillery, because we doubled it, so we can make twice what we did before. But we also know that 6 years in the future, we're not going to double our sales overnight. So we're kind of ramping that up gradually.
Right.
And so there's still a lot of moving pieces, a lot of increased production and balancing to be done at the distillery. So I feel like right now we're just kind of living in the now, just trying to maintain and keep doing what we're doing.
So Brent, when you're sitting in your hotel room in Frankfort, Kentucky in 2005, did you ever in your wildest dreams imagine, as you were drinking your first ever taste of Four Roses, did you ever imagine that you would be 16 years down the road where you are now?
No.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, it's a great story. I mean, Kentucky guy comes back home, gets with a distillery that's coming back home as well, from overseas. And that's just a really cool combination. The fact that you've been there with them so long and seeing this exponential growth. It's a really cool story. And I think that's a great, a chapter, if they ever do an addition, to the Four Roses history book that Al wrote, they need to add the addendum there on that one. That'd be great. So Matt, let's get back to the 2020 limited edition small batch. What are you thinking on the palate and the finish on this one?
Oh, the palate is really rich. It's got a really great oily mouthfeel. I'm looking at my glass, and the glass is just coated over with it. It's got a great oily mouthfeel, nice richness of some berries balanced out by some darker fruit, like some fig or plum, maybe a little apricot in there. The spice definitely comes through on the finish. I'm loving that. The length of the finish and that oak as well from the older age on some of those barrels. It's a hit, and there is no doubt about that.
Yeah, and the great thing is too, because like you said, I mean, I get that oakiness, and there's sometimes when I get that oakiness, but I get that tannic effect where my mouth just kind of goes like all dried up, and I just want to take a glass, take a drink of water or something. But you don't get that at all with this. You get that kind of oaky flavor, but you don't get that really tannic effect where you're puckered up with dryness. Man, just that finish. I talked about that with the small batch select. The finish just goes on, and this is the same way. I mean, the finish on this one just continues to keep giving, which is really cool. I really like that. So definitely 2 thumbs up, really high on this one. All right. So Brent, I guess we probably need to wrap it up here. Didn't mean to hold you over, but we appreciate your patience with us. And Appreciate you hanging out with us tonight, for sure. So before we wrap it up, though, where can people find information and find Four Roses and your products and everything?
Well, the small batch you can find pretty much everywhere. Like I said, the select will be in 30 states by the end of the year. Limited edition, that's a little bit harder, but it's released in Kentucky in September. Other states in maybe October, November. So, and it is limited. We typically do about 14,000 bottles of that. So just keep your eyes open. I think it's worth it.
Oh yeah. Hey,
No doubt.
Matt and I will both attest to the fact that it's definitely worth it. So real quick, are you guys open out there right now? I mean, can people come out just to the gift shop? Are you doing tours, or what's your status right now?
Yeah, still no tours or tastings.
Okay.
We are open for retail Wednesday through Sunday at both facilities, at the distillery in Lawrenceburg and the warehouse and bottling facility in Cox's Creek, which is just outside Bardstown. And all that information, we do have a great website, fourrosesbourbon.com. So
yeah, well, hopefully,
there.
I mean, it seems like, all indications are Kentucky's moving forward. Things seem to be kind of opening up here a little bit. I know I saw some friends here in Lexington today posting online that their kids were actually going back to school at high school, in-person classes. So I'm hoping that is a step in the right direction for all of us, and that soon we'll be back at that point where we're kind of back to normal, whatever that new normal is going to be, right? So before we wrap it up, Brent, anything else you want to add, or any final thoughts you want to send out to our listeners?
I don't think so. Thanks for tuning in. This has been fun.
Yeah, definitely, Brent. Hey, it's always good to hang out with a fellow UK alumnus. You know what I'm saying? So anytime I can get somebody on the show that's a UK grad with me, Matt's a Michigan guy, so I'm going to always enjoy when I can get a UK guy on here with me. So it's fun. But we appreciate it, definitely. Matt, anything else before we close it out you want to add?
Hey, Brent, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us and walk us through the complete small batch line that you all have. I know that we had a great time with it, and this is a really great expression that you all have done at Four Roses, the small batch, and the differences between the three that we tried tonight they're completely different. And it's really fun to see what you can do with your mingling and all the different recipes and everything that you all are doing there. So thanks for filling us in on what's going on with Four Roses. And it was really interesting to hear about your past and how it's brought Four Roses to where it is today. We're looking forward to the future.
Well, it's been my pleasure. I appreciate it, and I appreciate the invitation. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks a lot, Brent, and congratulations on everything. And hey, and I was going to say congratulations on your Master Distiller of the Year award last year. I forgot to mention that. I think was it Whiskey Advocate? Somebody
magazine.
Yeah, 2020 Master Distiller of the Year. So congratulations on that. Well deserved. You guys are just doing some great stuff. A guy that moved from Tennessee, kind of on a little bit of a whim, maybe, and now doing some amazing things at Four Roses. So we appreciate you joining us tonight. And with that said, I'm going to wrap it up, send us home with our tagline, which is, may your glasses always be full, and may you keep on living the bourbon life.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of the Bourbon Life Podcast. Our mission at the Bourbon Life is simple: to share our passion for all things bourbon with you every week. And we'd really love to hear your thoughts on how we're doing. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook at The Bourbon Life. You can also contact us by email at thebourbonlife@gmail.com. And you can always find us on your favorite podcast platform. If you have a moment, we'd love it if you would rate us and give us a review. So until next week, we hope your glass is always full and that you keep on living the bourbon life.
Whether it's rye, sour mash Tennessee whiskey, or bourbon, Davidson Reserve has something delicious to offer any whiskey lover's palate. Pick up a bottle of one of our award-winning Davidson Reserve whiskeys from your local retailer today. Visit www.davidsonreserve.com for more information. And cheers to drinking local.